Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's Humanitini. My name is Jay Stewart. I'm the Program Director at HumanitiesDC, also known as the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. I'd like to thank our host, the Brixton Restaurant, and in particular, Andrew Runkle, who made this possible. I would also like to thank Stephen Kolb, our videographer in the back. I'd like to recognize a few people in the audience, starting with the staff of HumanitiesDC. So to my left, your right, I'd like to recognize Lewis Hicks, our Director of Grants and Special Programs, Jasper Collier, Special Assistant to the Executive Director and the Director of our Digital Museum, and Stephanie Scott, our Executive Assistant, and standing next to her is Calvin Kuhnstack, our Publicity Director. So thank you all. Okay. HumanitiesDC is an independent nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, a federal agency in charge of supporting the humanities throughout the United States. HumanitiesDC is an essential part of the district's effort to provide quality humanities-related programs that preserve Washington's cultural legacy and promote civic engagement in every neighborhood in D.C. In 2017, HumanitiesDC is exploring the topic, What is your D.C.? Last year, we reviewed the 225-year history of the District of Columbia. This year, we are anchored firmly in the present-day concerns of D.C. residents. Our topics, which may be found on our website, range from graffiti art found along the D.C. Metro to D.C. government programs geared towards assisting the homeless. Our hope is to help the people of D.C. determine how their surroundings shape their concept of a shared culture and to recognize how their own individual daily decisions reshape that context in new and unique ways. Today's topic is civic conversations in a virtual space, and we are fortunate to have 4 panelists today, starting again to my right, your left, with our moderator, Pamela Perkins. Next to her, Will Summer from the Hill from the Hill newspaper. Joanna Jenkins, a professor at Howard University. And finally, Megan Garber from the Atlantic magazine. Professor Perkins is going to introduce each of them individually. I just had a couple of housekeeping measures to bring up before we get started. The first one is, of course, the obvious one. Everyone, please turn off or mute your cell phones so we're not interrupted during our conversation. The second thing is we only have 2 microphones, so the microphone for the audience for your questions can be found right here on this stand. So if you have questions to ask the panelists, I ask that you line up here and ask your questions directly into this microphone. And with that, I turn things over to Pamela. Oh. I'm sorry?
Aaron, our board member, is in the audience.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to recognize our board member, Aaron. Thank you very much, our board fellow. He's new to the board, that's why. Oh, and I forgot one other thing. Lewis? Can I ask Lewis to come? Lewis, can I borrow you just for a minute? Can you talk briefly about our grant-making program?
Thanks, Jay. Real quickly, there is a flyer on the table. We have grants seminars that are going to come up very recently, and I guess I laid down my glasses, so of course I can't see very well, but pick up one. We just had one on Wednesday, and we have one coming up on the 17th, the 12th, and the 19th. We have various formats, face-to-face in the office. We also have a webinar where you can join online through your computer, through your tablet, or through your cell phone. We hope that these are dynamic. We have 2 programs that are coming up, our open grants, which are basically giving you the opportunity to create a program telling a story about Washington, D.C. It has to be humanities-based. We also have a open, a Soul of the City program, which basically uses humanities subject matter to present Washington, D.C. in a local, a national, and an international arena, using the humanities as a focus of that, teaching leadership skills to youth. There is a minimum of 20 students that you incorporate into the program and develop a curriculum around that. So if you have any questions, please see me after the program. You can call me. The phone number for our office is on the flyer, and I appreciate your time and look forward to your dynamic projects. Jay? Pamela?
Okay, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We ready for 2017?
Yes.
And you know it, right?
Yes.
I usually start with the signature toast, but I'm not going to drink anymore right now. So I'm going to toast you with water, and if you have a glass, raise it for an incredibly productive, promising, wonderful, peaceful, add anything you want that's positive and full of love, 2017 to all of us.
Cheers.
Remember, you have to drink. Okay. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us this evening for this Humanitini. I've been a part of HumanitiesDC for about a year now as a recent transplant to Washington, D.C., and I can't think of a more important agency that is trying to make sure that we maintain a grasp of how important the humanities are to our fellowship as human beings. And so we have a lot of work cut out for us. There's a lot that's been done, and there's a lot that's going to be done. And all of us here have that common desire to see us all move forward in a really positive way. So I'm very grateful to be here. I am the founder and CEO of a company called the Human Communication Institute. I have other communication professionals here tonight, so I feel very honored to be here with them. In addition, I teach public speaking and other communication courses with a variety of universities and colleges, including the University of the District of Columbia, which is where they found me. I just want to jump right in because this is a wonderful, comfortable place. Everybody feeling comfy? Yes? Okay. You know, recent headlines are littered with discussions of incivility as they happen in real time through our social media. And I can't keep up with it. I stopped trying. You know, every once in a while stuff will come through and you pull up, you know, the news organizations from Fox to CNN to MSNBC and just everything in the Atlantic and the Hill and other representatives. But I was looking at some headlines today in terms of online discussions, and let me just give you just a couple. Just this morning, right before breakfast, which wasn't probably a good idea, woman in cruel Facebook body shaming meme speaks out. Singer Kim Burrell uninvited to Ellen's show after sermon caught on Facebook Live expressing homophobic beliefs. These are all today. Facebook Live beating. We don't even want to go into that one, of course. And then, of course, Trump tweet storm reveals Republican master plan for Obamacare. And all of these were trending on social media today, along with thousands and thousands and thousands of online conversations that are happening. So our discussion here is about civility. What has communication, computer-mediated communication, done to us as a society and a culture? I just wanted to introduce, you know, in 1964, there was a term coined by Marshall McLuhan, which I'm sure my panel is familiar with, and it was he coined the medium is the message. The medium is the message. And he was a Canadian professor in philosophy many years ahead of his time, and he also coined the expression the global village, which all of us are familiar with, as well as the World Wide Web 30 years before its inception. And so you may want to go back and read some of his work. And he was way above his time and had a lot of critics, but I think he won out on this one. So today our distinguished panelists will examine the intentional and unintentional impact of online communication and cultural civility. We'll start, I'm going to start introducing each of the panel members in order that they'll speak, and then we'll start with them. First, we will have Will Summer. He is the campaign editor at the Hill newspaper. Prior to working there, Will was senior editor at Washington City Paper, politics editor for Loose Lips columnist, a contributor at Fox 5, WTTG, where he made weekly appearances to discuss D.C. politics, a staff writer for Washington City Paper, and local editor for Kingstown Patch. He studied international politics at Georgetown University. Welcome. Then we will move to Ms. Joanna Jenkins, and she is an assistant professor in the Kathy Hughes School of Communications at Howard University. Joanna earned a PhD in Mass Communications and Media Studies, MS in Visual Communications, and a BA in Graphic Design with secondary studies in advertising. As a professor, Joanna has experienced teaching in a strata of communication areas. Lastly, but not least, we have Megan Garber. Ms. Megan Garber is a staff writer for The Atlantic, and many of us know The Atlantic is in the news quite a bit lately for its provocative writing, focusing on culture and entertainment coverage. Formerly a media reporter for Harvard's Nieman Journalism Lab and a media critic for the Columbia Journalism Review. Megan is also the recipient of a Mira Award of Excellence in Media Reporting. Congratulations. And she holds a master's in journalism from Columbia, where she later served as an adjunct professor. Please give our distinguished panelists a round of applause. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start. They're each going to speak for about 5 minutes on their particular areas of interest. Again, our discussion is online communication and the civility that exists or doesn't within that medium. And then after they give their opening remarks, we'll move to a forum. So as you're thinking of things, maybe jot them down. If you can't hold on to them mentally anymore, like sometimes I have problems with, feel free to write them down, because we would like to, this is your forum. It's about you. We provide the fodder, but you provide for us that which we need to really discuss that's pertinent to you as members of our community. So let's start with Will. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight. I know the weather is, well, I guess it's sort of cooperating. Let's kick things off here. How many of y'all have social media accounts? You can just raise your hands. All right. Yeah, that's about right. And, how many of you guys have, experienced some online harassment? Or some, it's not fun, right? Okay. So I'm sort of here to provide perhaps a, personal experience, what have you. As a reporter, you get hassled a lot. And, in a way, you don't have to kind of enjoy making people mad to be a reporter, but it helps, right? And so, you kind of have to develop a thick skin. So even in college and what have you, I was writing these rude blog posts about the administration, what have you. People get up in your grill. But I have found that it has gotten worse. With Twitter, and it's mainly Twitter. It's not really Facebook. People, they take issue with what you write, and that's obviously acceptable. I welcome, it's another reader. But when people, and I should say, as a, straight white man, not Jewish, what have you, I really get the least of the brunt of it, because, many of those groups are much more likely to be affected. And so people just, they just get kind of rude. As far as personally here in D.C., once I took over the Loose Lips column, there was a lot of get this white boy out of here, all this stuff. People were really getting up in my grill. But it's not too bad. I think more worryingly in our district, I guess maybe I've gotten off relatively easily. But more worryingly, I think we're all familiar with perhaps the shooting incident at Comet Ping Pong, for example, which developed perhaps a month or two ago. And I followed the right-wing media pretty closely, and this had kind of been bubbling up. This was right before this started. I was at home one night, and I saw all these guys tweeting pictures of Comet Ping Pong, and I said, well, why are they all obsessed with such a lovely pizza place? And, it of course turned out to be far more ominous. They had become convinced sort of through madness that it was the center of a Democratic sex ring. So, it's a very grim story. And so even before the shooting there, you talk to these people, and really it's just these sort of online mobs that very low information people get very riled up, and they convince each other of things. And if you look at the real cesspool kind of websites, and then obviously it ended up with someone coming to comment ping pong and shooting there. But even before that point, I think it's a new sort of thing as our society that we're dealing with, this sort of idea of, oh, you've been plucked out and now your life is, at least for some point, going to be a sort of living hell because people are going to be calling and threatening to kill you and all this stuff. I mean, this entire block in Chevy Chase, people were convinced they were all pedophiles. And so some poor guy is just a pizza man at another pizza place. He's like, yeah, they're just calling and saying they're going to kill me. I don't really get what the deal is. I mean, you certainly, it's a rough situation. And so, I'm thinking about, ultimately this stuff is sort of it's a tax, or it's an attempt to get us not to engage in civic discourse, right? And so what do you do about that? How do you help yourself before? Because, I mean, I'm probably going to get it someday. They're probably going to go through my tweets and decide to get me. But so how do you deal with that? Well, you can delete your tweets automatically, after a couple months. I find that's helpful. And, there's some stuff that'll do that for you. And otherwise, I mean, it's a real conundrum I think we're facing as a society. And, certainly, literally, our president-elect, his whole plan is, for jobs is to, bully companies to stay in the U.S. via Twitter. So, it's a grim situation. And I don't have a lot of great solutions, but I hope our other panelists do.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Johnny, you ready?
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm really excited to participate in this conversation, and I'm looking forward to, working towards some collaborative solutions to what we're encountering online. One of the things that's pretty interesting about my road to academia and what I think is my strengths and what I bring to the table is that I've had a career in advertising and creative media industries where I focus on creating campaigns. I focus on creating campaigns and creative strategies that allow brands to connect with audiences and to create relationships and to develop creative strategies that really resonate. And so in that path, I primarily focus on creating bridges between theory and practice. So in my classes, I teach a range of advertising, some PR, some psychology, some media, and what I'm really looking at is examining human behavior and how we can create effective creative strategies. Over the years, I've started to delve into research, and one of the areas of research that I am interested in that pertains to our conversation tonight is convergence. And I offered this theoretical framework about convergence that looks at a mutative force that looks at areas of commingling, intersection, and potential fusion between media, culture, and technology, and what this means and how media impacts technology, and conversely how technology impacts media. One of the things that I look at with that is generational cohorts primarily, right? So we have all of these different audiences that advertising and media cater to, whether they are millennials or baby boomers or Gen X, or even the upcoming Generation Z. So looking at these audiences and saying, okay, what makes them tick? And how do they engage with media? How do they engage with technology? And seeing what type of insights we can develop from that. One of the things that's really interesting about convergence is that it has had a really revolutionary impact on society, on industries, on institutions. And one of the things that came about through that is this really malleable time that we're in, right? So we kind of look at this space where media is colliding, where culture is colliding, intersecting and mingling and all these different things. And we say oh, is this the end of traditional media? Is this the end of this type of communication? And so one of the things that I often kind of even ask myself is like, what's the difference between an ending and a beginning? Like, what are some of those patterns, or what are some of those themes that you're going to pull out from that? And one of the things that's really interesting about being at a time like this is that it's really malleable, and we have the opportunity to create something that's really spectacular to offer to future generations. Like, we have something where we can create a foundation that we can build on moving forward. And then also we kind of have the power to say, like, what do we want our media to do? What type of functions do we want our media to provide for us? And what type of things do we want to give our attention to? And understanding that through these different power structures and participatory culture, there has been a shift. So whereas before there may have been some areas of like agenda setting in terms of what, and I'm sure there still is now, and we'll get into that, but like, you know, a lot of the agenda is kind of established surrounding some things that we think might spark interest among cultures, or some things that might be exciting. And so can we change what is exciting? Can we change what we want to talk about? And, you know, so we talk about like influencer models and communication strategies, and what type of things will shift and shape culture. So in that area, I've started to delve into ethics and started to delve into, you know, normalcies, and normalcies created by media and advertising. So I'm just really excited about kind of sharing this and just having these conversations, because I think that one of the things that we kind of lose sight in with this real-time technology and the nowness of culture right now is how historically relevant it is. It's so historically relevant, and the patterns and themes and concerns that we pull out from our conversation today can really help inform ethics, can really help inform policy, and, you know, create something that's really valuable for future generations and improve our daily lives today.
Thank you. That's a hard act to follow. Hi, you guys. Thanks for being here. I think I'm going to try to fuse those two comments together with mine, and talk a little bit about comment sections, which is something that in media takes a lot of our attention and a lot of our anxiety too. So my background actually, before journalism, I was in education, and that's always been a big interest of mine, is just, you know, how people learn about the world, how they interact with each other based on those learnings. And that's actually what initially attracted me to journalism, was the ability to do that on kind of a wide scale. And so comment sections for me, when I first joined journalism, were this, you know, wonderful promise of everything that a good democracy could be. You know, people having frank conversations and bringing their own experiences and opinions to the journalism that's written, the more sort of, you know, straightforward journalism, you know, for it to become more of a conversation. And to me, that just felt so wonderful. It felt to be what journalism should be about at its ideal. It felt like what the internet was about in so many ways. And what we have seen, as you guys are very well aware, is that none of that really has happened. Comment sections are, generally speaking, cesspools. They bring out the worst of people, of humanity. They are places that no one wants to be at. They are unwelcoming and awful in general. And what breaks my heart is that sometimes there will be really good comments that people leave and really good attempts at interaction, and those will get ignored in all the filth. So we in journalism, I definitely at The Atlantic, I'm sure at basically every other publication out there, we're thinking a lot about how to deal with that, you know, how to have conversations with readers that are worthwhile and valuable, and that, you know, allow the readers to participate and allow much more of a dynamic discursive relationship between, you know, news producers and news consumers. And I'm bringing that up partially selfishly because we have not come up with a good solution to this. We're trying a lot of different things, and nothing so far has really broken through. So if you guys have thoughts on that, I would certainly love to hear them. At The Atlantic, we've tried blogging. We've tried to sort of take things away from our comment section where just anyone can leave a comment, and instead, try to moderate things and try to break out the really good comments. We have editors who have been dedicated to doing that work, where they wade through the comment sections and say, oh, this one is actually really relevant and, generous of spirit and has something to contribute. So we'll try to elevate that somehow. We've tried to do that in curated blog posts where, there's curated responses to a particular story that the writer might respond to, and you sort of go from there. But, it's a lot of work for an editor to do. That's not maybe the ideal solution, although I've been really happy with the results so far. But I would love to try to find better ways to just have, conversations between journalists and the public, and to not make it a matter of binary journalism here and the public there, but to make it much more of a discursive situation. And I'm sure social media will play a role in that, in any solutions we come up with. But if you guys have thoughts on that, please do share. And I guess I'll turn it back to you now. No?
Now, we have some extra time if there's one or two things that you'd like to throw in there. Otherwise, I'm ready to have a discussion with you, as well as I'm sure members out here, because we want to get to the nitty-gritty. Why people are so mean? Why are they so mean? Why would they take the time to spew that which obviously is of great concern to them behind the anonymity of online communication? Do you have a thought about that, Ms. Joanne?
Well, I actually have a couple of thoughts. One of the things that struck me from your wonderful introduction was you mentioned Marshall McLuhan, and when he talks about the medium is the message. And he also, in some of his later works, talked about the medium is the massage and how it works us over totally. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be kind of like cognizant of, is how much impact the media has on us on a day-to-day basis. Like, being exposed to, on an average, like daily Americans exposed to about 3,000 ads per day. Like, that is a lot. And all of the forms of indistinguishable advertising as well. And so one of the things that I think is important is understanding during this time, when there are often paradigm shifts, and paradigms kind of like emerge in a very, infinitesimal manner, and you're not always aware of the change or aware of the impact of the change that you can create. And so I think for consumers to be aware of that and say, well, these aren't things that we have to pay attention to. And then I think some other, just being mindful that certain things are just like human nature, like, Pulp Fiction, like, we talk about bad stuff. We pay attention to things that are negative. Like, it's not necessarily something that always needs to be super alarming, or like, how are we going to handle it? But I think just understanding that sometimes these things just happen, not to excuse it.
Sure. Well, just a small thing to add to that, which is maybe a little bit hopeful. Whenever I do get a really angry email, vitriolic, terrible words, et cetera, if I respond to that person, often they will respond with the nicest thing ever. They'll respond with something really nice, really almost obsequious. It's like they didn't understand that there was a human on the other end of what they were saying, and it's amazing. But it's sort of, I feel like if there's a way to sort of scale that psychological recognition that in fact you are talking to a human when you put something terrible in a comment section or write something bad on Facebook or whatever it might be, if there's a way to sort of make that more of a systemic understanding, it might help a little bit, because people seem truly surprised that the words they put on the internet get read and get absorbed and all of that. So, yeah.
I got some theories. Sure. So, I mean, why do people do it, right? Well, why are people rude online? I mean, it's fun, right? I mean, have you guys ever it's certainly not the more extreme stuff, but I mean, you guys ever screwed with somebody online, like online game or something? It's a blast. Like, and so, you don't get I haven't gotten really real crazy, but that's why people like it, and then I think there's another combination, which is, and I say this as someone who spends like an enormous amount of time online, like the people who are spending ton of time online, like often are just like they aren't doing anything, which is why they have all this time to spend online, right? So just you're already sort of selecting a certain group of people who are going to be like less nice than the average person online. And so, I mean, I think that's a lot of it. And yeah, I mean, as far as what do you do about it, so I think it's very nice that Megan responds to her trolls. I don't have the time for that. What I like to do is, especially with this latest, Pizzagate and there's all these other things, and then they started to be like, well, maybe, why are you covering it up, man? Maybe you're in on it, blah, 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 blah. Well, so I just started saying, like, get a life, or like, I'll pray for you, or some nonsense, and then block them, and I mean, there's no reasoning with them. One more theory, as far as why people do it, I mean, so, you're talking about a guy, or, much less likely a lady, who, doesn't have, you look at these guys, they got like 20 Twitter followers, right? They got like the anime avatar, all this stuff. Well, they're trying to, but then they see someone who's like writing stories, has like a mouthpiece, or even someone who's just, more active, and they decide, it's kind of like flick ya, right? And so, I mean, if you don't respond to it at all, that's my method. But, I think multiple ways work, but it's very complicated.
Yeah, I agree. And it obviously is something that the three of you have thought about. I was recently listening to a discussion on compassion and communication, and they had all these professionals talking about it from the Omega Institute. How do we get people together to have a discussion? And many of us, even some of you sitting here in the room, are trying to figure out, how do I get my neighbors to talk with one another? How do I reach across the aisle? And one of the things that this discussion was talking about was that a problem is that people reading The Atlantic, people reading The Hill, people reading various news mediums are being selective in what they're seeing and what they're reading, and also that the computers are catching what you're doing, so that when you start to pull up stuff, the algorithms are created so that you will have certain news messages and information that you receive that your neighbors are not receiving. And I've noticed that recently, and I'm like, well, why is this on my, the page that I'm bringing up? And I'm wondering, is everybody seeing this? And I'm finding out, no, everyone is not seeing this, but they have my number. And so they're targeting specifically. And one of the things is Facebook, as well as Google, are looking at writing algorithms so that if there is a certain pattern of a certain type of incivility that's happening, that there must be a counterbalance to that in some kind of way, so that your algorithm, whatever's coming to you, cannot happen in a vacuum, that's not all you're getting. So Fox is not all you're getting. CNN is not all you're getting. We're going to make sure, says Facebook and Google and a few others, no, we're going to put a little something else on that page to maybe give you some thought. Does anyone want to say anything about that?
Sure. So, I mean, the real algorithm issue here, right, is we're talking about Facebook specifically. And Facebook, up until, they're supposedly making changes after the election, they've always said, we're just like, we're the phone line or what have you. We don't take an active role in this. Now, of course, this comes after they did hire human editors to handle their trending topics, got smacked down because they were keeping out, like, insane conservative sites. And so then this became a whole thing. They said, okay, well, the computer's going to do it now. So it's all going to be based on, what your friends like. Well, people cluster, in their ideological groups. So, you have these sort of self-reinforcing things. And I've talked to family and friends that, a lot of people aren't as like media. They have other things going on, right? And so they're not kind of evaluating the credibility of each different website. And it becomes this like just wild thing, right? It's just like, oh yeah. I mean, I hate to keep using Comet Ping Pong as an example, but it's here in a kind of extreme. But people, it's just like, think about it. Like Hillary Clinton doesn't run a pedophile ring. Like this wouldn't be allowed to happen. And they just casually think like, oh yeah, no, that's true. And it's like, what? And anyways, point being, finally we're getting a little attention to fake news, although frankly fake news has already been co-opted as just an ideological term for news you don't like. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Again, I would think to bring up issues of awareness and indistinguishable forms of advertising and agenda setting, because a lot of times you think that it's fake news, but in many cases it's propaganda or it's something that perpetuates an ideology that they might think that an audience might be predisposed to. Because if we look at just how media has influenced certain, generations and what they look for from media and how they engage with each other, you see a lot of narcissism, and you see a lot of people predisposed to wanting their ideas reinforced and their normalcies reinforced. And so I think that is the algorithms. That could be something that's definitely fruitful in terms of moving forward in that direction of offering people ideas that are contrasting to what they're normally getting online. Because if you look at other traditional methods of media, that's what you get, and that's what you're supposed to get. Like if you read the newspaper, or maybe even if you watch your local news, you should be getting contrasting opinions so that at a certain point you can figure out what you think, as opposed to reinforcing, right. So you'll think that certain things are true simply because that's all you're exposed to. So moving forward with this direction, I think is definitely promising, and I'm looking forward to not seeing everything that I have been shopping for online continuously popping up the next day.
Same. No, I think that's such a good point. And I wonder too, we're talking mostly about journalism, but I wonder if also the broader media sphere will come into play here, where like one of the things that interests me so much about entertainment and culture in general is just, it actually is a form of information, right? It's just not framed as such. And so, people get a lot of their understanding from the world from magazines and television shows and movies and music and so much of that. So I wonder if going forward, there's going to be something happening where information is sort of almost snuck in via entertainment, and people like journalists maybe will become more creative about how we deliver news to people to sort of get, messages out there, but also entertainment will become more politically savvy. I'm not sure what exactly that would look like. I think we're seeing the stirrings of it now, and we've seen the stirrings of it for a long time. I mean, the term infotainment has been around for a long time, but I think it's going to get more probably savvy and strategic going forward as a response to all this.
Yeah, I definitely can echo that, because it's like happening now in terms of product placement and media buys and media linking strategies. Is absolutely happening now.
Thank you. So you have thoughts and questions, and I know we have one here. So let's take it out into the audience, and then we'll come back for answers. You have to go to the... as far as this will stretch, I will come to you, but that is probably not that far.
Thank you all. Can you hear me? No. All right. So I'm particularly concerned about the gendered nature of online harassment to the extent that it silences women's voices and or threatens their physical safety when it spills out of, the online world and into everyday life. And can any of you speak to how you've seen threats against women online and off, that originate in online spheres being responded to? I'm particularly concerned about organized campaigns, not just sort of individual users, but organized campaigns to harass and intimidate and silence women. Whether that's legal or anything that from your spheres is being done on that.
So again, with the caveat that obviously I've not experienced this personally, but just as an observer, it's incredibly vile. I would say the online language, the online violence, perhaps against women and Jewish people, I think is at the top of our issues with social media. The classic example here, and this might get a little inside baseball, but are you guys familiar with Gamergate, right? These sort of essentially like a bizarre kind of like, if you imagine the alt-right, right? We've heard a lot about them, but they're obsessed with video games. Right, so but basically, like they were convinced that women were ruining video games. Well, it's absurd, but then they started focusing on these individual women, and just these, just in a day, these women could get hundreds of death threats because they're essentially, as I said, just for participating and having a job and making the games these people wanted to make, and they'd say, you're rude, all these death threats and what have you, and it's continuing to go, and again, these sort of like larger alt-right, we've seen sort of coalesce in a lot of reactionary elements that have, we've seen the website Breitbart, who now has their head in the White House, explicitly make an alliance with trolls. I mean, they've said we love vile comment sections, we love trolls, and again, that's I don't have any great insights, but I do agree. I think it's a very serious issue.
I think a potential avenue that you could go through, simply because a lot of this media is new and it's just not regulated in ways that other traditional medias are. However, you can't mitigate the impact that it can be having, especially when you're talking about potentials for violence. And then also because there's so many young people online and so many ideas being formed at this time. And so it is important to be vigilant against these things. One of the things that I think could be promising about this is corporations and advertisers, because they are and want to be at the pulse of this conversation. It's very interesting how we look at brands, and a lot of times saying I personify a brand. And so you'll be talking to a brand on Twitter, you're talking to a brand on social media. That kind of made me think of the DiGiorno and domestic violence incident, where DiGiorno tweeted something where they thought it might be funny or it might be a joke, was about domestic violence, and how consumers were able to band together and get an apology and get a retraction and get progress pushed in a direction that they might not be able to get because policy is so new. So that might be an avenue to pursue, using your consumer dollars, using your consumer support, because a lot of these corporate entities want to be involved. And when you find out that they're just conglomerates or subsidiaries of other large corporate institutions, you can actually create some change in that direction. And then also, because we're online, we have such an opportunity to collect data. And so that could also be an opportunity to appeal to some of the federal legislation and just say, we can collect and we have record of all these things, like Twitter, all of that is in the Library of Congress. And it's whereas before, a lot of these things were happening, but there may not have been a record of it, or these stereotypes may not have been, just with journalism and so many things that people are capturing on their phones. It's not like these things haven't been happening, but it's now that we have record of it, we can push this forward. And so that might provide another opportunity as well.
That's excellent. I don't have too much to add to that, but I would say I think, it's all of that, and then the police need to actually take the threat seriously. I think there's a tendency to dismiss it as, oh, that's just online, that's just in the digital world, not the, I would do air quotes, but I can't with the microphone, but it's not the real world, and of course, the digital world is the real world. So I think it's a matter of just sort of changing a little bit of assumptions when it comes to the harassment. But I would also add, there's sort of the lower grade threat here, which is, I myself have not had much overt threats of violence. I mean, I've had some, because that's just part of journalism right now, but I haven't ever felt personally attacked or anything like that, so I'm very lucky in that regard. But I have felt I don't want to go on Twitter, because I know that people are just going to come out and be like, who are you to say this? Or, there's that sort of low-grade silencing effect that I think those online mobs ultimately want to have happen. And so I try myself to be very vigilant about that, just as a woman, to say, no, I'm actually going to say what I want to say and not be intimidated. But it's very easy to be intimidated, because it's a lot to put yourself through. If you just want to say something or share a story or, write about something that you're interested in, and people come back at you with, how dare you, and that kind of thing. So I think there's sort of the different levels of it. But ultimately, I do hope that law enforcement in particular will get a little bit more open-minded about what constitutes harassment.
So, okay, we have others coming up. Get ready.
So, full disclaimer, I am just proposing more questions, not answers. So, 2 questions actually. The first being like about this concept of algorithms, and I'm more curious about output as opposed to input. So, with the comment section, for example, if we were to create an algorithm that filters out negative commentary by searching like certain words and things like that, what would be it could potentially be problematic, and I'm just kind of posing that as a potential solution maybe, but also trying to think through what could be the problems that might exist if we create that solution. Additionally, I think it was Quartz that might have had this article about like the pre-internet generation and like the post-internet generation, and I'm really the second question is really about like the young people that have no point of reference beyond dialogue existing in these virtual spaces, and what maybe tools and points of discussion that we can come to like empower people to not just leave those discussions online or feel so puffed up that they can speak in those spaces and not bring them into the real world to abuse their quotes. But yeah.
Thank you. So we have 2 questions. One, basically the last one dealing with helping millennials navigate the spaces that they've always been in, and Generation Z, which I am not prepared for, to move us to whatever level that's going to. Yeah, wow. And then your second question concerning the algorithms and filtering out everything that is not likable maybe to certain groups, but you have other groups that like that kind of stuff. So who wants to speak to that? You don't have to speak to everything, just whatever you feel comfortable doing.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, what was the first question again? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, so certainly people have tried this, right, with comment sections and what have you, and you say, you put racial slurs and you put all this stuff, right? Well, I don't know if computers are smart enough for this yet, because then you just put a number where you want to put the letter, right, and it gets through. So, so then you have, okay, let's try user moderation, right, community moderation. So we'll have, it's like Reddit, we'll have upvotes and downvotes. Well, I think Megan's very lucky, The Atlantic, they seem to have a lovely readership, because, I read the comments over there, and they're not too bad, they're nice. Every other site you look at in the world, though, is just like super vile. Well, sorry, maybe I'm jumping the gun here. But imagine like the rarefied readership of The Atlantic, right, versus like every other site. People are getting wild in these comments, and so you can have these commenter things, but it ends up often that the bulk of the people are like, yeah, I really dig the terrible comments. Look at I was just looking at some vile stuff today on Twitter. Thousands of retweets. People love it, and so look, I think this is perhaps something we've been grappling with for a couple of years in our country, is that perhaps maybe the bulk of the people are like pretty bad, right? Or there's a significant amount. It's certainly online. And then what do you do with it? Do you crack? Do you just get a lot more heavy-handed with kicking people off platforms? Well, maybe. But then there's all these alternative sites. There's Gab for if you get kicked off Twitter. There's Vote if you get kicked off Reddit. There's all this stuff. So. No, it's a thorny issue, which is why I'm glad we're having this. And then what was the second question? Okay, so I will say this. I think, and perhaps this is how everyone feels about all the other generations that aren't theirs, but I feel like, the younger folks, it's just like the vilest stuff. I'm so glad I don't have kids yet, right? Because it's just, they get at it. And I know this is about civic engagement, but just about interpersonal relationships in high school, and especially middle school, of course. Just the worst stuff. So, how do you, institute empathy? We've been dealing with that for thousands of years. But as far as I do find, I think the older folks, the folks who never really grew up until maybe their 50s or something, I think they're some of the worst as far as online behavior goes. Now, not all of them, but I think, I look at these people who are just cursing me out on Twitter, all this stuff, and their profile says like proud granddad, and I'm like, what's your problem, man? So I think they're maybe not as experienced with it, and they don't know the mores. All right.
For the first question, I think it kind of circles back to what I mentioned before, is that it's just human nature. And then some of the things that we talked about is like trolls need an audience. And if they don't have an audience, then sometimes the trolls go away. if we compare what's going on online to what happens in the newspaper or what happens on television, there's regulation for that. Like, if there was no regulation for television, I'm sure we would see a lot similar behavior that we're seeing online as well as in newspapers. So I think that, again, I have to echo the sentiment that it's time for us to say what we want and what we don't want, and hopefully inform the policies that will regulate, media moving forward, like online and social media, because right now it's just too new and people are still just observing it. And so while we're observing it, let's pull out the things that we really want to address. And then in terms of the generations, I always find these topics to be so funny and exciting because I observe generations to connect them with brands and advertisers, and generations, they always, particularly millennials and baby boomers, they always think that they're so different and so special. And, I think sometimes it just really comes down to respect. And seeing things from their perspective, because actually a lot of millennials are comfortable with online to offline and offline to online, so they could be cool with, exploring things in a different way or seeing things in a different way, and actually tend to be pretty open-minded. So people might be more open-minded than people give them credit for, but they're kind of the perceptions of that generation. Or a lot of times it's a small percentage of the population. And again, because we have this predisposition to negativity, or we have a predisposition to understanding and remembering things that are highly emotional, just as humans and how we information process, that's what we remember. That's what we give our attention to. But, a lot of times that just comes down to this idea that we want to protect ourselves and we want to keep ourselves safe. But if we use that in a different context, or we simulate that in a different way, we get different results.
And along those lines, this is sort of an orthogonal answer to the youth question, but I would love to see media literacy taught really regularly in schools. I just think it's such an important skill to have right now, just in terms of understanding what's fake news and what's not, and understanding, the perils of having filter bubbles, and understanding why it's important to see things from both sides. And I actually think that then can redound to empathy, and that can redound to good civic conversations if kids are having a basic understanding of, how important information is and how important, a fact is, and that we can't, we've got to agree on some things, fact and truth being one of them. So it's kind of a long shot, especially probably going forward into the coming years, but I would love to see that just regularly taught in schools, and to consider it a really important part of civic life.
Just as a little kind of sidebar plug, the museum has excellent resources for that, in terms of media literacy and digital literacy, and teaching them to even younger generations. That's something that we implement in our curriculum, but sometimes you think okay, by the time someone gets to college, they need to know these skills ahead of time. So if anybody, wants to share that information, it's on the museum's website, and it's really awesome.
If I could just butt in here. As far as the idea of teaching media literacy, I think it's a great idea, but there's it's never going to happen, right? Because it can't. Perhaps it can at a private university or something, but I think anything that could be reviewed by the government, we're literally our sea levels are rising because people can't agree on actual science. And so how are you going to tell them to say, okay, well, now don't trust this guy, or don't trust, abcnews.ru or what have you, it just seems unlikely. That said, I think it's a great idea. But where?
At the museum.
Yeah, what is the percentage of people? Okay, all right.
Yeah, because, and I tend to agree, because I find as a communications professional, when I'm working with students, most of you had to take public speaking, right, at some point in college. But what happened to interpersonal communication? What happened to intercultural communication? What happened to family communication and all of these types of human communication aspects that really help us to see from the other point of view. They don't exist. And they'll tell you in a minute, oh, well, that's a dead science, or that's a dead major or dead curriculum. That's why we have a dying culture in society, because we're not teaching our young people that as you speak, so you are, and as you think, so you are. So, I'm all for that, and we need to think of how we can infuse more of this into our curriculums.
Oh, Pam, can I help, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Who's going to go first?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask a question. You hold on, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Dustin Cantor, and my question is in relation to, I'm running for mayor here in DC for 2018. And because you're studying mass communication on a regular basis for not just DC, around the country and around the world, what are some best of breed or proven models in other places outside of our community where the government is being effective and efficient in gathering information from its residents and getting it upstream so that they make a difference?
All right, sorry, I feel like I'm just like, give me that mic. All right, yeah, sure. So, I don't know a heck of a lot about outside of DC, but certainly in DC, so the government has. It is a little ad hoc. It's not a great setup, right? Because it ends up being like, okay, who complains on the neighborhood listserv, who figures out who their ANC commissioner is, that sort of thing. The big thing was 15 years ago, the big CapStat revolution. It was going to be all the statistics based, blah, 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 blah. Well, then, of course, if you guys have seen this, sociological study called The Wire, it turns out then you end up, fixing the stats and all that. But yeah, I would love to talk later about your mayoral run. I think you may be the first declared candidate besides the incumbent.
That was I kind of lost my train of thought for a second. In terms of just the data capture and just, I think, looking at things not maybe from a top down, but more of a bottom up, just because we have an opportunity right now for so much participatory culture, and participatory culture is the norm. So people want to be involved, and it could be an opportunity to really inspire civic engagement and look at ways that you can shape and shift culture. I would definitely say maybe looking at influencer models and like two-step flows, and like really looking at the generations, what do they like, what will they respond to, and who are the people that they respect in their communities.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the obvious question. What are influencer models and two-step flows?
Okay, so influencer model. So if you're talking about communication strategies, you like a lot of times you would just put out a message and you would think that people would respect your institution or your government. Well, if you have an audience that might be skeptical about the government, if you have an audience that might be not interested in the government, or not interested in the messaging that you have, then you would use like a model that would put out the message and then allow it to trickle down to that community through an influencer. And we use that a lot in communication strategies, and we also use it a lot in advertising. So I will say from my personal experience and my background, I worked on the census campaign, creating some of the creative strategies and the campaigns for that. And we definitely use a lot of trying to identify who the influencers are in this community and sharing that message with them. And so it comes from a respected source, and then they share that information with their community, and then that way the message is more readily received. So in that way, you're looking at sharing that information, but you're also looking at sharing and shaping culture. You have like an opportunity to shape the culture because it's coming from a respected and trusted source.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to put I'm Dr. Babach. I'm in education and theater. I wanted to put the conversation in perspective with respect to civic, the word civic. And when you talk about civic, you talk about the citizens, you talk about the rule of law, you talk about the way how people are supposed to interact with one another in a civilized way, respectful way, and all of that, non-violently, abiding by laws, law and order, and those kinds of things. So when we talk about the internet, and we talk about millennials, well, at this time, we cannot just only focus on millennials, because even the adults don't behave well.
As I think Will stated earlier.
Don't behave well. Mm-hmm. That's number one. The other thing is that in order to have some kind of a regulation, in order to have some kind of a control, respect for one another, that has to come, one, through the curriculum that you provide the children in the schools. When we were coming up in Africa, and I'm sure here too, you know, we learned civics, we learned about government, we learned about how to behave yourself. If you don't teach your child how to eat with knife and fork, he will not know it. And you have a lot of those kinds of things that are going on now. So the idea about people going on the internet and using profanity and all of that is something that is being encouraged by the system. It's being encouraged by the educational system. The educational system is not teaching these things. It's not in the curriculum. The kids go to school and their pants are all the way down. They don't even know how to dress. So now we're supposed to help them to do that. Even the parents that take the kids to school in the morning, their pants are hanging down too. So those kinds of things are the things that are adversely affecting the society. The other issue, the other thing is that because civics is not taught and people don't know how to react with one another, there's a lot of violence going on. And that has to be addressed, you know, with respect to the kinds of programs that we institute.
So, sir, excuse me, I'm going to ask you to ask a question or bring your comment to a brief close.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, but what I wanted to say was that the programs,
yes,
the programs that you implement or that you institute should be based upon how you can help the children, how you can help parents understand the meaning of respect, how to live together in peace and harmony. And some of these things can be done through plays.
Yes.
They can be done through literature.
Yes.
They can be done through music.
Yes.
And through dance and all of that. So basically, those are things that I just wanted to say to put this into perspective for you talking about the civic aspect of the conversation.
Thank you so much. And that is your comment is taken to heart, and that's why we're here with HumanitiesDC, that encompasses all of those aspects of expression that you talked about: theater, drama, art, all of those. So your point is well taken, and we're an audience that agrees with you, definitely. Sir, your question.
Great. First of all, I really am enjoying this conversation. So I compliment you guys for coming out and, you know, throwing this out as a topic of conversation. So I'm a baby boomer, and I'm a native Washingtonian, and I grew up in Brookland in D.C., but I also lived in the suburbs. And my mother and my father were involved in the arts and culture. One side of my family was really deep and heavy into arts and culture. And the humanities and the arts, from my perspective, is the foundation for everything. And what we found over the decades in this city is that minority kids who are low income, moderate income, you can't close the gap from a family that's middle upper income because they give their kids music and dance and theater and arts. And from the perspective of that, there was something that the lady talked about, convergence. And I really like that idea about convergence. And in the Atlantic, magazine, there was an article about Jane Jacobs' Guide to the Trump Presidency, City Lab. That was an excellent article because it talked about some of the pillars that are structured virtues in our society. And when you start getting into mediocrity and start dissolving those strong, vibrant virtues, you get a Donald Trump. So on that point, I'd like for each one of you to talk about some of the things the gentleman just talked about, which was your culture and the underpinnings of your culture and how that's reinforced, whether you're a millennial or you're an old baby boomer that did a lot of stuff the millennials did. And we, in the 60s, we were like really wild and crazy, okay? And I look at that and I say, I'm glad my kids weren't like that. But I have millennials. And I also remember when I had to wait to go home to make a telephone call. I couldn't just say, oh, I'm going to call somebody and talk like you can now, right? And so there's a speeding up of technology that allows us to engage in all kinds of conversation. But the question becomes, who's regulating that conversation?
Okay, so he wants you to speak on, if at possible, the role of our society in creating young individuals ready to engage with the other, whoever the other is, and again, the role of the humanities and other areas of bringing us together. And, you know, why is that disappearing? Why are they cutting funding in so many of these areas that are designed to teach us about each other? Anyone want to speak?
Sure. Thank you. That's a great and very big question. It reminds me, actually, so not to mention McLuhan again, but also to mention McLuhan again. He has another quote, which is, actually, it's attributed to him and possibly not from him, but we change our tools, and thereafter our tools change us. Is that a McLuhan? But I think it's so profound because actually, you know, having to go home to make your telephone call to your best friend or your boyfriend is so different, just profoundly different from picking up your phone in your hand and making that call. And I think in ways that we're just now beginning to realize, ways that are both really subtle and really profound and deep, and, you know, going to change what humanity is a little bit going forward. So that's not really an answer to the question, but I think it's such a profound thing that we sometimes underestimate. You know, we suddenly have computers in our hands, and that became so normal so quickly for a lot of people, but it's not normal. It's such a big change. So I think we need to actually, if we can, step back, you know, and look at things sort of systemically and how those technologies are affecting us, and I think that will behoove us all. And I sort of mentioned this before, but I believe so strongly in the power of pop culture. I mean, just, you know, music, that can be a thing that bridges generations, that bridges people of different class, of different races, of different genders. Like, it's something that if we choose to, we can all share. You know, and not completely, but I do think, you know, it's the mass in mass media, and that's very important. And I think actually, because of that, Hollywood and all the producers of that culture, I would hope that they would be very thoughtful about the culture that they put out there for people to consume, because really that's a big way that we understand each other as people, and there's a big responsibility that comes with that. So.
I definitely think that there's a lot of positivity associated with this topic, and looking at it from a historical perspective, like understanding that these are just themes and patterns. You might talk about someone wearing their pants low. You might talk about somebody who wore their hair long or tore up their draft card. So there are some things that that accompany youth culture, and how youth culture wants to redefine themselves or shape themselves outside of what their parents have created for them, and they want to make their mark in society as well. And so I think that during these times where we're blessed with opportunities to have these conversations and participate in this dialogue, that is so important that we speak with each other and not talk at each other, because you might have an idea about a community or a generation and realize that you're very, very similar and just speaking in a different way, or, like we said, using different tools. And so one of the things that's really interesting and that's really important is to develop an awareness. Like, before, generations were kind of looked at in like 15 to 20 year marks, but because of technology and because of how it has shaped and drastically altered our culture in such a rapid way, you're looking at generations being marked by like decades. So you have tons of people that are challenged by intergenerational communication. And so we can look at the benefits of technology, and we can, benefit from all the ways that they make our lives better and shape us, but we also have to understand how it affects us, how it impacts us, and develop solutions to combat that and to make it work, for our embetterment as a whole. That's kind of
Sure. Okay. So I've got a couple takes for you. I don't think. I mean, I think culture. I think that's a great way to instill empathy in kids and what have you. But as far as reaching, seeing your fellow man or whatever, that's not going to work because, I mean, the country, and now partially sped up by technology, is incredibly atomized. I mean, you look at these, everything from their news sources to, the New York Times had these lovely graphs that show, the most popular TV shows in, different areas, and they're completely different. They're completely divided by politics and race and class and whatever. So, I mean, I think the solution here ultimately to both gentlemen's questions is, increasing the social welfare state, so people have more time so they can read to their kids instead of working 2 jobs and all that stuff. And it's not it's not going to come from an app, but I think that's the only real solution possible for this, and that probably won't even work too. So
I think one of the things, just to re-emphasize the point of history, is that to watch this pendulum and just to say, like, it swings in one way, it's going to swing back the other way. So to look for your opportunity and to get in there. And then one of the things that's really interesting is that we talk about, social media and how the media impacts us, but we also have the opportunity to talk to each other. And we can talk face to face. We have choices with our media, in addition to, the impact that it has on us. But like right now, we're talking to each other and we're having a dialogue. So I think that's pretty awesome.
And that's exactly related to what I was going to say, which is, I believe so much in the power of mass culture, but I also believe very strongly in the power of, the small and the communal and what we're doing right here. And if there could be an event like this that were geared toward having generations talk to each other and just share their perspectives, and that could scale out, I think that would be so powerful and such a good way to start those conversations. So.
Yeah, let's remind ourselves, there's a term called yellow journalism back in the, 1800s, where everyone was upset about the sensationalism of journalism at that time. But we had a culture that I think collectively said, well, that's not what journalism is. You're supposed to just give us the facts. Well, that was a big fight back in that time, so that institutions such as Fox News or even CNN or other entities could not just be in the box that they allowed themselves to stay in. Nowadays, because of the plethora of information and different sources, it's just out of the box. It's out there. And we're not really talking too much tonight about political correctness, but people got tired of hearing that. And as a result, they have now been given permission to state what has always been there and been the obvious in terms of their perspective and how they've lived and what they've thought. And so, like, people say, well, the cat's out of the bag now. Well, I think it always has been, but we have mediums today where it can be extremely expressed in just a click. It's out there now. And how do we deal with it? Maybe Will is saying, well, hey, this is it.
Well, I'll point out, maybe, people had some rude stuff to say about yellow journalism, but it did start a war. Thousands of people died. And, I think fundamentally, and perhaps we're getting a little off topic here, but, people like that stuff. That's just a fact. A majority of people, that's what they like to see. William Randolph Hearst had one of these yellow journalism papers, Citizen Kane's made after it, and he's a rich guy, And so, certainly perhaps this will change someday, but I think, and, as you say, I think people have to work together and have their civic engagement.
we're ready for the next
Okay,
question.
great.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no worries. This is sorry. I wanted to say right before my question to say thank you to DC Humanities Council. When I got here, Jay asked me how I found out, so I got an email the other night. I said, I've got to go to this. It's a perfect time of year for it. And just before I stood up, I posted on Facebook where I was and what I was doing, and you talked about the face-to-face, and I sort of missed it. I'm one of those people, I'm old school. I go to Hallmark and get a card and send that in the mail, you know. It took me the longest time for my BlackBerry to send my first text message, but in any event, to what the gentleman said before, when I was growing up, you talked about the socioeconomic gap between what have you. My parents, we'd read, street signs, and we'd have reading time. The TV was cut off, that kind of thing. So I think you need to be creative about that. And I think the arts are really important, and that's probably one of the issues we have in the country and the world today. But one of my questions I wanted to hear from the panelists is, we sort of seem to be reactive about what's going on. So what are your comments about being proactive in terms of what's taking place online? I mean, I was sort of raised, I'm from North Carolina, and I lived in Tennessee and went to school in Texas. But it's like, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all. And if somebody says something negative, maybe you should go and say, that wasn't very nice. You probably shouldn't have said that. Maybe go to the person that it was said to and say, I'm sorry that person said that. How can I make it better? How can we change this kind of thing? And one last thing, it's nice to see you in person. Well, I used to work for the late superintendent, Dr. Ackerman. One of the things I did was media relations. So waking up in the morning reading Loose Lips. My heart used to beat fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to comment? Again, everyone doesn't have to.
I think it goes back to the tech stuff. I think in some ways, just in terms of, I think it's very easy to underestimate how impactful it is for not literally everyone, but like many, many people to be able to express any thought they have at any given moment to the entire world. I mean, that's just a profound paradigm shift. And I think we're all just reconciling with that and figuring out how to deal with it. I think that people, because of that, their tendency perhaps is to overshare or to, or just to share a lot, I should say. I shouldn't judge it, but, this is what I'm having for breakfast and it's great. And, but I think then, that was how I was when I was first on Twitter and different things. And then I realized no one cares what I'm having for breakfast. So then I dialed it back. And I think that something like that might happen on the culture-wide level where we're all still kind of frenzied with the ability to put ourselves out there and to understand each other too, in these various ways and on these various platforms that we have. And I think we all might swing a little bit back where we do stop to think like, oh, I don't have something nice to say. Maybe I won't say that. That would be, maybe that's too optimistic, but I do think that something like that could happen where we're all figuring things out right now and we're all experimenting with these new technologies. And I would hope that in the decades to come that we'll arrive at something more civic, civil.
Yeah, civil.
Yeah.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being patient up there.
First of all, I too want to thank you all for being here and for sharing your expertise. It's really cool to see people you've seen, heard and read behind the scenes to actually see their faces. So I appreciate that. And I really do care about what you eat for breakfast because you have to understand that we find out, and this is just an aside and it goes right with where we are with this discussion, we make decisions on where we're going to eat based on the restaurants we attend. And when we share that information, our whole form of communicating now has changed. If you're on a specific diet and you have certain recipes, whole recipes are given online. So please don't stop sharing what you're having for breakfast and maybe some I want. And saying all of that, I want to touch on something. I want a comment from each of you, all four of you, on something that is really like this, in my opinion, and since we're being honest, this dark cloud that's coming up behind us. We as Americans really embrace freedom of speech. We embrace freedom of the press like it is our mantra. It is what has caused significant change on so many levels within our country. And we are at a very serious place in history where that is being challenged. On the way here, it's ironic, I knew what we were talking about, but on the way here I was listening to WPFW, one of my favorite stations, and they were talking about the Anti-Propaganda Act that was buried inside the Defense Authorization Act, which is going to give, it's going to establish an anti-propaganda organization. And that I'm telling y'all something you need to go do your homework on. Yes, because what that's going to do is any article that the government feels or any information that the government feels is a threat to the government's agenda, they will be given the power to challenge it. In addition, Congress is doing a lot of various and sundry things, and they ain't even been on the job for 48 hours. It's just amazing. That's going after the things that you all are making your living doing. I would like to hear your comments and whether you all have processed and digested what the changing culture of government will do to what you do as professionals in communicating and managing communication for the public.
You want to take a minute? I'll just, while they're formulating their thoughts, my basic thought is that freedom is not free. And what will end up happening as we try to dial back the issues of incivility and the possible violence and other things that may come up out of that, because people have a voice, people have a right, is that eventually we will lose, all of us will lose certain rights to speak in a certain manner, write in a certain manner, express in a certain manner, if we don't really carefully mitigate that line between what is allowable and what is not. And I think a big reason why we have so much that we sit back and go, I can't believe that's out there. I can't believe people are expressing themselves. Where's the government? Where's the cops? Who's policing this? It's because we are a society that says no. We have a freedom to speak. And I'll sit and listen to a Rush Limbaugh all day long, which I will not, but I would, if I felt that there was something that I needed to know. And so I am of the school of, we need to have open and free access of expression, but there also needs to be a way in which we can understand how far that expression moves into the actual relationship that we have with one another. That's the part that I think is the most difficult.
Okay, I'll just say thank you very much. It's very heartening, obviously as somebody who makes his living off the freedom of the press and thinks about it a lot, and, you see the polls and, people don't like the press, and blah, 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 and normally I don't mind, but then, you have a situation where, so it's very heartening to hear that, for people who, aren't getting their paychecks from freedom of the press, that people care about it as well. And yeah, I think it's potentially some very ominous times. But I think people have been, just staying engaged, I think, by reading news and also staying engaged in your communities, I think is always good and always helps.
Yeah, I just also wanted to thank you for that comment. It was really interesting and also really timely. As we've been talking about consistently through this evening, is that it's a time of a paradigm shift, and a lot of these things are very normal when a paradigm shift occurs. And like you mentioned, freedom isn't free. And when there is a potential power shift, or where you see lines get blurred and then there's opportunity for power redistribution, it's not unlikely that you're going to see people make advances in certain areas because power is up for grabs, or there's an opportunity to influence a larger community. One of the things that's really interesting is that we talk about negativity, or we talk about, maybe stories, but that's all such a small percentage of what goes on in everybody's daily life. Like, we talk about media, but there's still so much that goes on. America is so large and it's such a broad community. And so there are a lot of opinions and a lot of ideologies that haven't been formulated yet, but sometimes it seems like who has the most vocal opportunity to share those beliefs. So I think that in a time like this, opportunities that we have right here are so great to, share information and keep each other informed and keep each other aware. But a lot of these things are just par for the course. But I think that if we stay rooted in positivity and awareness and informed by what is going on in history, then I think that I'm hopeful that the pendulum will just swing back in the other direction.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that will be so important going forward is to ensure independent media. As you guys know, media organizations are generally in pretty dire financial straits right now. Even the ones that are, I would do the air quotes, successful, are still not doing great. They're definitely not Hearst levels. So I think if media has always, or I should say journalism, has always had this idea of, we sort of suffer for our art. Like, it's never been terribly remunerative to be a journalist. We've always sort of held that almost as a badge of honor, and I think as a result have not wanted to ask people for money or anything like that. NPR might be an exception, but in general, journalists just sort of step back and we do our thing, and we sort of congratulate ourselves that we're upholding the First Amendment, but we just do it. And I think actually, like, journalism might need to get better about being really explicit about, we need your money in order to help you all out, and that I would hope would become part of the paradigm going forward, is that we're just a little bit more explicit about, this is actually a financial thing in a lot of ways. This is a commercial enterprise that many of us are engaged in, and we need all of your help. And I was really heartened after the election that a lot, like the late night hosts now, are playing such an important role in terms of being actually kind of journalists, or at least being public voices and advocates, and they almost uniformly said, give to these organizations, not just journalistic organizations, but advocacy organizations, and, give your money, put your money where your mouth is. And I actually, as much as I hate to say it, I wish there were something more basic, or something more hopeful, but I think putting your money where your mouth is can actually get us pretty far, so.
Questions, any more? NJ, you stood up a minute ago. You have something that you really want to...
I want to go ahead and ask this question. Earlier, earlier you made the statement of online world and the real world, and I'm wondering how close we are on making the decision of making sure that online is the real world. That those are that you just cannot say anything that you wouldn't say in the real world to a person face to face, because you use both of those examples. I think that people forget that there's a person on the other end of those words. Maybe we should take a look at our online world and our real world, and making sure that people understand that it is just one world here. It's just one world. And I think that could be helpful from a media standpoint, to start bringing that language out, to start communicating in that way, Yeah.
Well, are we near the end? Oh, we have someone coming? Yes, okay.
Excuse me. So you were talking earlier about the attack about female gamers, and I think I may have read the same article you were talking about, where it was sort of like, I think it was called maybe the attack of the beta males. And I'm wondering if, and I'm going to try and relate it all together, if some of this is really just about people feeling disempowered. Mm-hmm. And the same thing going with the election, people feeling disempowered, and when they finally find an avenue to express themselves, their frustration comes out in this really sort of ugly way. And the question then becomes, how do you engage people who may not be in the minority or may not be in the most common way of thinking into the conversation, so they don't feel like they're outcasts?
I remember reading just the other day the Omega Institute about in 2010, the co-founder of Omega Institute instituted a new program called Take the Other to Lunch. And everybody was like, oh, that's so touchy-feely, is that really going to work? And she said, actually it did. She took many people to lunch that were other, and two things happened. One, they were very happy to be acknowledged that my otherness is important, and it's not ensconced in what you think it should be. And secondly, that every single experience that she had, and Omega Institute, if you Google it, is a huge institute around human relations, basically. And she said that every single person said, I thank you, and now I see what I did not see. And some people said, wow, I need to change. And others said, I'm not changing a thing, but I thank you for the lunch. Let's do it again. So they were less apt to, maybe share and regurgitate that which they might have done before that luncheon. So I think individually there is a lot that we can do to and I know that there are many institutions such as Dr. Baba brought that up, Mosaic Theater, the National Capital Association of Black Storytellers, and others, tons that are here saying, Humanities DC, what can we do? How can we get everybody in? Now, I think it's a good idea what she said. Let's get some young people in here on opposing sides and, let them talk it out with professionals that can mitigate that discussion so they won't start throwing food or whatever. But, anybody else want to comment on her comment? Yeah. Wow. So what do y'all think? Have we reached the end of our civic discourse tonight? Or should I say, have we reached the beginning? Of our civic? I'm not afraid.
We are in the now. There is no beginning.
And it's now, and it's present. And I know, I would have my students say, well, Professor Perkins, you need to be careful. No, I don't. Was Rosa careful? Was Martin careful? I said, no, it's a time for us to speak. Well, you can't say everything. I can say exactly what I want to say, and I'm willing to accept the results of that. Now, I need to temper. I need to be careful. I understand that. But there's a way to talk to everyone in a level of, I see you. I see you. And so this is where we're trying to go with this. And I thank you so much. Please give our panelists a round of applause. Wonderful work. Remember, they work in isolation, so it's kind of hard. It's like, okay, can I answer this? But they step up, and we appreciate the work of Jay Stewart to bring these people forward. And let's fill up the room. Let's bring the other with us. Invite the neighbor. Exactly. Invite the neighbor. We'll be nice. We'll be nice. Jay, you want to close us out? I would. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Emma, I'd like to thank you particularly for moderating this panel. You did an excellent job, and thank you all very much. This is a great start to our year. And I just want to put in a plug for next month. February 2nd, we have our next Humanitini. It's on the Michelin Guide and the evaluation of the DC food culture and the dining scene. Look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you all for coming.